Evening, everybody. It is Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. So I will call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. We're going to start off with something a little bit different. We've not had a chance to include a public comment in our Board of Finance meetings in the past, and the Board of Education, of course, has had that. And after discussion, we thought that it would be a good idea to make a provision for that in our agenda, starting with this meeting. So I will do that. I think the rules were that people would submit comments up until the start of this meeting, or perhaps even join the session. So Jennifer, I guess I would ask you, are there any public comments?
You're on mute.
I do not see any, but if any members, anyone who's on here who's not a member of the Board of Finance would like to comment, go ahead and raise your hand. And I do not see any.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so next up is the setting of the interest rate for tax deferrals. As a reminder, this is the program the town has in place to provide for the deferral of property taxes for people who meet certain criteria in terms of income, age, disability, all of that. There's two plans. I think Plan A is at a particular income level, and Plan B is that income level plus $20,000. So it's slightly more generous in terms of the folks that it encompasses, but obviously the interest rate for the deferral is slightly higher. So that's why we have sort of two numbers here to approve. But this is statutory, so there's no changing this. It's just something that we need to approve every year. So for Plan A, that would be 0.5% above the STIF, the State Investment Fund investment earnings rate, and then Plan B would be a full 1% above that rate. So for Plan A, it'd be 0.57% and 1.07% for Plan B. If there's no questions on that, can I get a motion to approve? Okay, Paul, second. Rob, all in favor? Okay, great, 6-0. Okay, terrific. Transfers, Jennifer.
We have, the first one is for the building department. They're requesting to convert 2 part-time positions to a full-time, and we do have Pete Solheim, the building official, is on our call today to answer questions that you might have.
Thanks for coming, Pete. It looks like you are having trouble retaining part-time staff as opposed to finding them. So, hence the reason for this. Is that true?
Yes, that's very true. As I said in my request, we had 3 part-time officials and they moved on to greener pastures with different municipalities for full-time positions. Normally, a part-time position building official is usually a retiree, which we haven't been able to find any of those. And the gentlemen that I did have were younger guys, and they were getting out of the construction industry per se. And so they took the opportunity to come on board with me part-time. But then as soon as a municipality offered them a full-time position, they were glad to accept it. And
didn't you tell them that there are no greener pastures than Darien?
Oh, you can only try, but didn't seem to help.
No, I totally understand, and this seems reasonable. Any questions for Pete?
Yes, Peter, are there any special credentials that the person needs in order to assume this position?
Yes, they have to be a licensed, at a minimum, they have to be a licensed assistant building official.
Okay.
And as I have asked all the present employees that we have in this department to get their full licenses, which they all have done.
Okay.
And that gives them the opportunity to inspect everything. We cross inspect. We inspect electrical, plumbing, HVAC, energy code, accessibility requirements, and the full license gives them the ability to do that. And they can also act on my behalf when I'm absent because they are fully licensed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions for Peter? Taylor.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. It's a full-time position, but it's a short-term thing with no pension implications?
Right, that's what I'm understanding. They will be eligible for all benefits except the pension because it's considered a temporary full-time position. And the reason we did that is because we want to test the waters. Right now, we're in an unusual busy time with some major projects in town that have started and will start, which we will definitely need the help for. But we're not sure if this is just a bubble right now, and it may back off a little bit after a few years. So we don't want to commit to a full-time position at this time permanently.
And I just want to clarify on the pension for you, Taylor. So while the position, while it is filled for these 2 to 3 years, they will technically be a participant in the pension because they are a full-time employee and meeting the criteria. But if ends after 2 to 3 years, they would receive a full refund of their pension contributions. And so they wouldn't end up receiving a pension because they wouldn't be here long enough to vest.
Terrific. Any other questions for Peter?
I'm curious, is the $37,000 the salary that you expect to pay the person, or is that just,
Well, no, because we're in halfway through our fiscal year.
oh, okay, thank you. It seemed really low. Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
Terrific. Okay, motion to approve. Rob, second. Paul, all in favor? Okay, terrific. Thank you, Peter. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more for Parks and Rec, equipment maintenance. Pam, hello, welcome.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm here to
It was
request. Yeah, we have a sand sweeper that we use to keep both beaches beautiful every summer. And after I just did find some paperwork, it was a 2013 it was purchased. And just this winter, they had a maintenance professional come in, and he suggested that a few the internal mechanisms of the sweeper needed to be maintained and needed some work. So I didn't want to drain the entire account. We're halfway through the fiscal year. So I felt it was important to ask for $8,900 above and beyond the account.
Well, it sounds like it's a whole lot cheaper than buying a new machine, so that's the good news, right?
Yes,
And your sense is that it's a better expenditure to get the maintenance done and that the repair will last a long time than investing in new equipment.
absolutely. I mean, it's 7 years old, going into 8 years, and it was $42,000 purchased. Different than what I had put, approximately $50,000. I hadn't found the paperwork on it.
This seems to make sense to me. Anybody have any questions for Pam? Okay. Motion to approve. Okay, Dan, second. Frank, all in favor? Okay, terrific. Pam, thank you. Good luck. I hope the machine is
Yes,
ready to
and
go.
thank you for your time, everybody.
You bet. Take care. Okay. Next up, review administrative transfers that Jennifer and Kate have done. Jennifer.
Not much so far. We have had 6 administrative transfers through the beginning of January. They total $10,048. Nothing overly controversial. There is one related to COVID in human resources because we do need to cover COVID-19 testing for employees for certain circumstances, workplace exposures and such.
Okay, all sounds fine to me. I guess my only question would be as I guess I ask every time, is the policy still working in terms of limits and you and Kate collaborating on all this? All still good?
Still good.
Okay. Any questions on this? Okay, do we approve this or is this just an FYI?
Just an FYI.
Okay, great. Okay, discuss the budget process. I sent around not long before the meeting started, and Jennifer, you can post this with our materials. What I did was I took the calendar that we approved from the last, or a couple of meetings ago, I guess, and did what I normally do, which is to break this out a little bit and include some more detail. So all in black writing is the Board of Finance calendar that we approved before. And you'll see at the top of this, the not grayed out, which is January 19th, our meeting today. What I also did was I put in the upcoming meetings, the Board of Selectmen budget reviews, as well as the Board of Education meetings. And this will be their meeting tonight, obviously, also their continued budget discussions, their public hearing, and then finally their approval of that budget, which, by the way, is the same night that the Board of Selectmen approves their budget, February 9th. So in addition, I've also put down the details for our budget review meetings that will take place in March. And I basically left the assignments as they have been in the past, which you can see there in my green shading on the right. And you can see how I've broken up the topics by meeting. Looks like I left out land use, which I'll put in there. In any case, over the course of the 4 meetings, I've allocated the topics pretty much like we've allocated them before. And so the questions for the group is one, first thing I would definitely encourage, and I will try to do this myself to chime into this. Kate's budget review for the Board of Selectmen is always extremely helpful. So that to the extent that you can participate in that, it's a good way to get a lot of questions answered, right? Because you hear the main presentation sort of from the source, if you will. And I think that one presentation really helps a lot in terms of making sure we get off to a good start with our understanding about the Selectmen's proposed budget. I would similarly say the same thing for the Board of Education review. If you didn't see it live, you can certainly watch it on Vimeo. At a minimum, I would watch Alan's overview, which was on the 7th. That's just a great summary of sort of at a higher level, kind of what he's planning to do. And then if you've got questions, you can go in and watch the detailed presentation that they did at their meeting on the 9th. So in any case, this is what we've got. You can see meetings that are going to come up. In a way, all the COVID things are bad, but one great thing is that a lot of these things are videotaped and a lot of people aren't there in person anyway. And so it really does facilitate review of all this. So definitely look at them if you have a chance. But again, the budget assignments that I've got there for our budget review sessions that start with the regular meeting on March 16th and then continue through April 1st. I guess my question would be just if anybody has any concerns about that, or if there's any switching up that's needed with assignments. Again, I've just left them from last year, but does anybody have any questions about this calendar or the process in general?
John, I've been unable to open the attachment since you sent that. I'm having
Okay.
some technical issues, so I'll just reserve on that and circle back. Thank you.
Yeah, circle back. And again, our budget, our real budget work starts when the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education hand off their budgets to us. And so that's going to take place. I lost it. Where did it go? We received the budgets on March 2nd. So both the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education will have voted by then. But that meeting is really our kickoff for our own budget process. And so it'll start with reviews, and then we have our meetings, and of course a vote to set the mill rate on April 6th before the spring break. So that's where we are. I think just in terms of process this year, one thing I would mention is that I'd like to thank everybody who offered questions for the Board of Education. I know those were sent to Jim and also to Duke. And so the Board of Education is meeting now, and I believe they're going to address both our questions and other questions that have come up either from the RTM or F&B or from other sources. So that'll definitely be a meeting to watch on video. So if you have a chance to do that, please do. But they'll take up our questions then. It's not the last time we have a chance to ask questions. You can see that they've got unfinished budget discussions. They've got time reserved on the 26th for that at their regular meeting. And there's also a public hearing on the Board of Education budget. And both those sessions are certainly going to be ones that I tune into. Their public hearing is on February 2nd. So let's definitely take a close look. You should have all have your budget books for the Board of Education now. Definitely take a close look at those. And if you've got questions, what I'd recommend is you consolidate them with Jim and with me, and let us go through and make sure we've got a consistent, non-redundant list that we submit to the Board of Education. Any comments on process or content on any of this?
John, is there a building tour?
So that's a good question. I did not see that on our calendar. Did we, what, do you know what, Jennifer, the status of that is whether they're going to try to do any kind of facilities tour this year?
I don't know, but I can ask tomorrow and let all of you know.
Okay, that'd be great. Great question. What else?
It's on the 13th.
March 13th?
Yes, March 13th is the information I had, starting at 8 a.m. in Middlesex Rotunda.
Be there or be square.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I hope there's a way to do that. It's always good for me certainly to see all that. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll take another turn on this calendar and I'll include that information on here. So great. Thank you, Paul. Other questions about the budget assignments calendar, all that? Okay, the last point that I'd make is I know Jennifer updated the budget spreadsheet. So this is a spreadsheet that we created a while back that's got everything pulled into one spot. And the great thing about it is we can add columns for changes in the original superintendent or town administrator budgets by the Board of Selectmen or Board of Education. We can put in our own changes and it's dynamic. You can see the impact on mill rate. And it's kind of one-stop shopping for us to have a really clear view about our decisions and how those decisions translate into the overall tax picture for the town. So I haven't had a chance to review all that. Jennifer, I'll give you a call this week and we'll definitely send that around to the group that you can start to take a look at it. But again, it's the same one we've had for a number of years now, and I think actually works pretty well. But we'll definitely use that again for tracking any budget decisions that we make and kind of having a live and dynamic view on the mill rate as it's affected by those decisions. So more to come on the budget spreadsheet, but it will be ready very shortly. Okay, I didn't have anything more on budget process. So I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer, for the financial report.
Okay, year-to-date budget is tracking pretty well. We did get an update this morning with the Board of Selectmen on tax deferrals. There's so far just around 50 tax deferrals. Dollar-wise, they're split about 52% commercial, 48% residential, and they total, I think, about $520,000. So the tax collector will be making one last communication and press release to let people know that the option is out there. But so far about $520,000.
I forget, is there a deadline for applying for that?
I think it's January 31st.
Okay.
There is a deadline, and I think it's the end of the month.
Okay.
Other than that, on the revenue side, it's a little odd. The town clerk continues to pull in a lot of revenue from high volume of real estate transactions. They have actually, through December 31st, exceeded their $1.5 million budget by about 8.5%. Building permits continue to lag prior years, but from what we have heard from the building official and planning and zoning, the permits are starting to get pulled for redevelopment projects. So we should see those numbers ticking up in the near future. On the expenditure side, there's really nothing of interest. Everything's tracking as expected. We haven't had a huge amount of transfer of COVID activity, nothing necessitating transfers except for the big beach security transfer that we did earlier in the year. That being said, there is a COVID update. On page 7, it kind of summarizes Town and Board of Ed for last year and the town so far for this year. We've spent $97,000. The big number this year is we just learned the middle of December that the state was releasing the final allocations of CARES money. So we have actually already received $162,000 to apply towards our COVID expenses. And they have extended that eligibility period to cover July 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021. And they have expanded eligibility. If we don't have that much in direct expenditures, we can use it to support public health and public safety payroll. So we will definitely be able to utilize all of those funds.
That's terrific, actually. There's application processes for all those grants? Is that, or are these just automatic grants based on some criteria?
A little bit of both. The final CARES Act, they required us to submit a claim 2 days after they notified us that the funds were available. And then they released the funds within the next week or two. Something like FEMA, they've restricted their eligibility, what's considered eligible, and we will have to actually apply for that. And there's a big review process. But we do continue to learn about new, smaller grants that are becoming available for things like testing and vaccination. So we continue to submit claims and applications as needed on those.
Hey, Jen, anything on the CARES Act 2, lack of a better word? The one in December that was passed late?
No, we haven't heard anything more on that, on how it'll trickle down to us.
Yeah, I think there's a piece of it, not sure if it's governmental related, that opened today for
Okay.
for certain businesses.
Yeah, a lot of times they, when it comes to governmental, they'll pass it through to the larger organizations. So ours would go to the state, and then the state will determine how to allocate, and we haven't heard from them yet.
Okay, thanks.
Could we go back just to page 5? You've got a comment there on education cost sharing. It says anticipate downward adjustment for ECR payment could be in excess of $200,000. So is that excess cost reimbursement, and is that supposed to be down in the ECR line? And did you just hear about that, or you have more color on that?
We've had this flagged for a while. So last year, right around the time that COVID was happening, boards of education had to submit their ECR estimates. And Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I'm never quite sure of the process, but the initial payment is based on estimates, and then there is a true up against those estimates. Because it was at the start of COVID, their estimate ended up being higher than their actuals. The way ECR works is when you receive your money in the ECR money in a particular budget year, it does credit against the Board of Education expenses. But then when the state trues up the estimates and the actuals, any adjustment plus or minus comes in through educational cost sharing. So because of COVID and the lower expenses than estimated, their initial expectation is that we'll see a downward adjustment of $200,000, but the state has not put out that information yet.
Okay. The only other question I had is, can you remind me what we do with the obvious deficit in the parking fund and how that's covered? Is that simply covered out of fund balance, or is that?
Yes, for this year, now that permits are being renewed, we're starting to see some revenue coming in, but there is sufficient fund balance to cover the deficit from last year and an anticipated deficit for this year. And then there will need to be, if this situation continues, there'll need to be a discussion of how we handle next year. So I think Kate has some of that worked into her budget proposal that she'll present next week.
Okay. Then I'll let you continue. I didn't interrupt you. Go ahead.
That is all that I have.
Just on the active bonded projects, there's a few of these that have sort of estimated completion dates that were in 2020. I don't know. I can't remember whether those completion dates were just placeholders and estimates and don't need to be updated, or if they have some kind of implication in terms of when bonded revenues need to be used and kind of all of that. I don't know that there are any issues here, but I just recall that's being a potential problem with some of this.
We do use it to make sure that we're not going to go outside of our allowable window on how quickly we do need to spend money after we borrow it. Most of these have been adjusted. The ones that I am a little bit concerned about are the 2 school roof replacements. Those got pushed back. We have borrowed some money. So I do need to keep an eye on those. And if needed, we will transfer bond funds from these projects to another active project that's moving along so that we can use money in the appropriate time frame. So the estimated completion dates do come into that review, but for the most part, they're really informational.
Got it. But because of your ability to transfer those funds, we're not going to run into trouble in terms of required timing around expenditure of bonded funds.
Right. We'll have a way to address that if we come up against that timeline.
Okay. I did not have any more questions on the financial report. Anybody else have comments or questions for Jennifer?
Just one question about roofs, and this is just to everyone. In Trumbull, we're considering replacing 3 roofs, and the person with whom we're working suggests that we go out early and get bids, because evidently the queue could be backing up, and we would get a better cost, a better price, and most likely get it finished this summer if the earlier we went out. And I was wondering if there was any appetite to, say, pre-fund the roofs mentioned in the Board of Education capital budget.
Yeah, I don't know that we're considering that. It's a good point. It strikes me though that maybe the next stop in this conversation is a talk with Duke or with
Okay.
Rich or Alan. Since you know this space well, maybe you could just drop them a note to inquire about that and raise
Sure.
the issue that we've got with regard to the completion timing for those projects. Not super serious, but it'd be great to have an update on that. Maybe you could reach out to them and ask.
Will do.
Okay. Other questions or comments on the financial report? Okay. Approval of the minutes from our meeting in November. We canceled our meeting in December, so this is from the last meeting. I had a chance to read through these and didn't have any questions, edits, or other issues. Anybody have any concerns about the minutes or changes?
No.
Taylor?
Yep, I think it says that I nominated Jim Palin for vice chair. I believe that was Frank Huck.
Yeah, I think that you are correct about that. Did you second that?
I might have seconded it, yeah.
All right, I'll put that down as a yes. Why don't we just switch those two? Maybe Dan, if you could take a note of that, or Jennifer, actually, since we're right here, and correct that. So any other edits to the minutes?
No.
Okay, motion to approve the minutes of November 11th, and we were all here. November 11th as amended. Paul, second. Rob, all in favor? Okay, 6-0, great. Okay, that's minutes. Next up, special assignments or committee reports. We start with you, Dan. How are things looking with the Oxford Elementary School?
I don't have much of an update. I think things are progressing. I think there's not much of an update since our last meeting. Other than that, I think construction was delayed a couple of weeks, but things are moving forward. We have another meeting Thursday.
Okay. Comments from the audit committee? I guess Jim's not here, but Rob, from you.
Yeah, we met, John. We had a good meeting with the auditors. Nothing out of the ordinary out of the audit this year. I think we're just waiting for just a couple of follow-ups. I think Jen's doing one thing for us. We just talked about this right before this meeting. So I think we'll probably talk a little bit further on some of the findings in the February meeting, okay, once we get a little more data.
Okay, terrific. Either assignment or committee comments? Very good. Chairman's report. I guess the thing I got to bring up is we're all kind of aware of this, but the Board of Education has supplied an estimate, as you've seen, of their likely full fiscal year COVID-related expenditures. And so right now that projection sits at about $2.4 million, 2.389934 to be exact. And so that is a variety of things from staffing and facilities to technology, materials, athletics, transportation. And they've done a pretty good job, I think, of keeping track of all of that. I remain concerned about our ability to have a holistic picture that takes into account not just expenditures, but things like lost revenue, avoided costs, sort of all of that. But at least the good news is that from a specific expenditure point of view, they're able to keep pretty good track of all that. And I would notice that they're also either collecting or expecting grant reimbursements, nearly $500,000. So I think that's good. And I certainly would encourage continued aggressive vigilance on that. But right now, the net number looks to be $2.384 million. So what's going to happen is that they will want to come to us to get an appropriation for that sum. It's a little unclear exactly what the next step for us will be, whether we want to approve an appropriation for that full amount now, or there's some other strategy that we want to take, but that's going to come up, I suspect, at our February meeting, but I don't have details on that yet, but that's coming. The process, of course, would be for us to consider that, and then it would go to the RTM for a full appropriation, keeping in mind that this may not be the only time they need to come to us for an appropriation to cover these expenditures. But as I'd said publicly, we've got fund balance to cover this, and we want to make sure that we're responsive to the Board of Education as well as the Board of Selectmen to the extent they need funds to cover investments for this important activity. Jennifer, do you have any comments on either that or on the process for them seeking an appropriation? Anything you've heard other than what I've said?
No, I have not heard anything further. I was just going to write myself a note to reach out to Rich Rudel and send him what our form and our process is. So
Okay.
we're consistent with the format in which you receive it. But other than that, I don't have any details as to the amount.
Okay, you're not expecting anything on the Board of Selectmen side, are you? I mean,
No, it still looks like we'll be able to move things around internally to cover. We
Okay.
haven't encountered anything large enough to really raise a flag on that.
okay, great. All right, so that's what's coming on that. Any questions on that aspect of the current fiscal year expenditures? And just so you know, the questions I submitted to them were one, how the staffing side of this is going. As I said in my State of the Town address in December, my sense is that they've probably invested everything they need to invest in terms of staffing additions. At least that's my hope. So I'll try to get that confirmed. The other thing I was wondering was whether they had done any benchmarks on this. So in other words, how does some of their expenditure levels on a comparable basis, like per student or percentage of their budget or something, do we have a sense of how that compares with any of our DERG A comparable towns? And then also, do we have a sense from a process or investment standpoint, how some of our COVID strategies and expenditures are comparing with other towns? In other words, are we spending dollars on the same types of things, or are we doing something different that's better or worse versus these other towns? So I suspect they'll discuss that tonight. I haven't had a response, but those were the couple of questions that I had that I'd submitted on that. So more to come on that. That's, I think, all I had this evening. Does anybody have anything else to add for the good of the order? Or Jennifer, have I missed anything?
No, I think that's everything.
Okay. If there is nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn. Okay, Rob, second, Paul. Okay, we stand adjourned. Thanks very much, guys, for a good Zoom meeting, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.